It was 10 below zero as I pulled into the parking lot of the former state hospital. It was January 10th with 18 inches of snow. My job was to inspect the former state hospital for redevelopment. The state hospital consisted of 5 buildings. When I walked into the first building, I was surprised to see contractors very busy dismantling the building, removing anything of value, such as copper, plumbing, and wiring. I thought it was strange they had me inspect a building that was in the process of being demolished. The next 3 buildings were in the same condition, with contractors taking apart those buildings as well. However, the 5th building was set off by itself in the woods, quite a distance from the other buildings, connected to the other 4 buildings by a tunnel. The 5th building had housed the criminally insane. Since the state hospital was closed down, the tunnel was closed as well. The only way to enter the 5th building was through a basement door. The windows were covered with plywood and the heat and electricity were turned off. Thankfully, I had remembered my flashlight so I could see the totally dark, freezing cold building. I saw many strange things in that building, such as heavy-duty straps anchored to the wall above the toilets, and a laboratory with tables that had long straps attached to them. I wondered what type of strange things went on in this building. The building had 3 wings with a central caged station in the middle of the building. As I walked through the building, I noticed out of the corner of my eye what seemed like human figures. Since it was totally dark, I only saw them for a moment from the limited light from my flashlight. I froze because there wasn't supposed to be anyone else in this building. When I shined my flashlight on them, they turned out to be cardboard figures set up in various locations throughout the building. Then I noticed bullet holes in some of the walls. They didn't tell me that the police had used this building for their training. I was on the 3rd floor in one of the wings of the building when I heard a thumping sound. I figured it was the wind blowing a loose panel of plywood on the outside of the building. I continued inspecting the building, but the thumping sound became louder and sounded as if it was coming closer to where I was. Could it be a loose panel, or maybe an animal or something loose in the building? Could it be some strange person in the building who was mentally deranged? I wondered if the police had some other type of training set up that would make that noise, and moved as quickly as I could, carrying my clipboard, camera, and flashlight, always keeping watch for anything unusual. I made it to the stairway and could still hear the thumping sound. I quickly ran down 4 flights of stairs to the basement door and out into the cold. Whatever that noise was, I didn't want to stick around to find out. I finished my report and turned it into the company, never knowing what was making that thumping sound. My job was to inspect a rendering plant that had been closed down for redevelopment. I had no idea what a rendering plant was, but I soon found out. The 2-story building was boarded up, with the only access through an opening about 20 feet above the ground. Fortunately, there was a ladder available to reach that opening. When I climbed through the opening, I was a little surprised and thankful that there was a floor at that upper level. Unfortunately, the only light seemed to come through the opening I had just entered. The further I walked into the building, the darker it became. I quickly turned on my flashlight, but it seemed very inadequate to see what the space was like that I was standing in. Because I couldn't see what was in front of me, I stood still. The only sound was the wind howling past the opening I had crawled through. I pulled out my camera and flashed a picture of whatever was in front of me. When I looked at the screen on my camera, I was amazed to see a huge chain hung from a pulley, and that chain went down into a dark pit that was about 20 feet wide and 20 feet to the far wall. When I aimed my camera down, the edge of the pit was only 4 feet in front of me, and was about 25 feet deep. I was thankful I didn't take any steps forward, or I would have fallen into that pit. When I turned to inspect the rest of the building, I thought I saw someone out of the corner of my eye. When I aimed my dim flashlight in that direction, there was nobody there. I thought maybe it's just being alone in a very dark building that tends to play tricks on the mind. The building was in an obvious state of disrepair and deterioration, with the metal door frames corroded and rusted, and the concrete walls cracked and coated with what looked like mold. As I walked through the building, I continued to make notes and take photos. Then I noticed some movement at the far end of the large room. I used the flash on my camera to see what it was, but all I could see was a lot of debris scattered around the room. I finished my notes of this building and then was walking through the hall that connected this building to two other small buildings. Just like the large building, the other two buildings were in a similar state of deterioration, with cracked walls, paint peeling almost everywhere, and debris scattered around. Then I noticed again some movement down the hall in the first small building. But this time I was able to see a creepy man with tattered and dirty clothes for a split second before he disappeared around a corner. I continued to take notes and photos of the buildings while moving slowly and always watching for this man. It seemed as if he was watching me, but keeping his distance. I came upon a bathroom that looked like it had been used recently, but because the plumbing was turned off, it had a horrible stench. I figured maybe this man was homeless and living in these buildings. Next, I went outside to inspect the outside of these buildings. Again, I noticed the creepy man out of the corner of my eye watching me and following me at a distance. Several times I turned to confront him, but each time he disappeared around a corner. When I was done with writing my notes and taking photos, I waved to the creepy man, assuming he was still watching me as I walked to my car. The buildings were demolished to make way for new development, so I hoped the man found a place to live if he was homeless. Inspecting an old house is typically not a big deal, but this was not a typical old house. The house was about 90 years old and in horrible condition. The outside of the house had worn, broken, and missing siding, with peeling paint and rotting siding near the ground. There were several broken windows that had plywood covering the holes. The front porch was so worn that the floorboards were cracked and sank when I stepped on them. The porch roof was sagging because of a missing post that had once supported the roof. When I walked into the house, the first thing I noticed was a strong smell of rotten eggs and urine, so I quickly put my mask on. Then I noticed various clothes and broken pieces of furniture scattered about the living room on dirty and worn-out carpeting. I got the impression there was some sort of fight that happened here, and whoever lived there left without taking a lot of their clothes with them. Then I noticed various clothes and broken pieces of furniture scattered about the living room. When I walked into the kitchen, there was food strewn on the counter and a half carton of eggs on the floor, with most of them broken. Several of the cabinet doors were barely hanging on by broken hinges. There were broken pieces of dishes scattered on the counter and the floor, with what looked like dirt and cat litter in several places. When I walked back into the living room, I noticed a few dents and holes in the wall, possibly during a fight. It looked like the dining area was actually part of the living room, because there was a fairly clean area on the floor where the table probably sat. When I looked into the bathroom, there were only remnants of the sink and toilet and tub, because they looked like they had been hit with a sledgehammer. I got the impression that whoever lived here was being evicted and decided to destroy the house. I opened the door to the basement and began walking down the stairs. Since the electricity was turned off, it was totally dark. I turned on my flashlight and noticed a lot of cobwebs and dust on the steps. Then the smell of mold hit me, so I was glad I was wearing the mask, which helped a little bit, but not much. The basement was damp, dark, and creepy. There were cracks and water stains on the walls, with obvious mold as well. There was also standing water on the floor in a few places. When I turned to look where the water heater and furnace once stood, I noticed and smelled a dead rat. It must not have been dead very long because the smell was not that strong. The large wood posts and beams supporting the house had huge cracks in them, with the bases of the posts showing signs of rot. When I went to go to the second floor, I noticed that the stairs seemed to be sagging a bit. The carpeting on the stairs was so worn that the edges of the steps were visible. When I stepped on the first few steps, the stairs partially collapsed. Thankfully, the handrail was securely attached to the wall. I grabbed the handrail and stepped on the outside edges of each side of the stairs as I walked up the stairs, because I didn't want to fall through the stairs. The stairs squeaked and moved a little, but I was able to make it to the second floor. Just like downstairs, the carpet was worn and dirty, with clothes scattered around. In a few areas, I was cautious to step on the clothes because I was concerned what might be under them. The first bedroom was rather small, with a dresser that had a missing drawer, and there was a broken bed with sagging mattress with various stains. The wall had graffiti scribbled in several areas, and the window was broken. The next bedroom was in similar condition, but there was a mural of a flying elephant drawn on the wall with markers. Then I heard a noise that sounded like a little kid crying softly. It startled me because this house was supposed to be vacant. When I stepped into the third bedroom, the noise became much louder. I looked around the room and noticed the bed had collapsed and the sound was coming from under the bed. I kneeled down and looked under the bed and saw a raccoon that was trapped by the collapsed bed. The mattress was ripped and shredded on the bottom, probably from the raccoon trying to get free. Not knowing if this animal was vicious or not, I decided to leave the room and call for help. I called animal control and they said that they would come get the raccoon. I finished my report and left, hoping someone from animal control would get there soon.